The Michigan Wolverines and the Ohio State Buckeyes will be matching up in an undefeated top three showdown tomorrow at noon Eastern Time on Fox. I cannot wait to listen to Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson with their awesome commentary talking about this game, and I can't wait to hear the environment of the Big House, see Ohio State and Michigan dial up their best and play at their best in a hope to win the Big Ten and reach the college football playoff with a chance to win a national title. The first for Ohio State since 2014 and the first for Michigan since 1997. Yesterday, I released a video detailing 5 reasons why I think the Ohio State Buckeyes will win this matchup. I explained in that video, the same that I will do in this video, that I have Michigan winning, and I have them winning by a score of 31-17. However, there are a plethora of reasons, more so than the Michigan-Penn State game or the Penn State-Ohio State game, where the Wolverines or Buckeyes can come out on top in this matchup. Yesterday, my reasons for why Ohio State will win this game were an improved defense, Travion Henderson, Marvin Harrison Jr., a head coaching edge on the sidelines with Sharon Moore substituting in for Jim Harbaugh, and the possibility that Michigan's success over the past 2 seasons has been primarily due to their cheating. Well, today, I will discuss 5 reasons why I think Michigan will win this game, irrespective of my own prediction. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you who are watching this, all of you on the face of this planet. I'm very thankful that I am alive, and I'm thankful that I have nearly 13,000 subscribers, and I am thankful for my patrons and those who follow the channel regularly as well. I hope that you all have a blessed day, and I hope that this week of college football is phenomenal. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more college football content. Like this video, comment 5 reasons why you think Michigan will win this game down below, and check out my Patreon page via the link in the description or the pinned comment if you want to support the channel and also get some bonus content. But without further ado, let's jump right in and talk about reason number 1 why Michigan will win this game, and that's their defensive line. Over the past 2 seasons, I think the number 1 reason why Michigan beat Ohio State was their offensive line. They had a trench advantage specifically from the angle of their offensive line. This year, I think it's different. I think Michigan's defensive line is decisively better than Ohio State's offensive line, than Michigan's offensive line. I think the Wolverines have the number 1 defensive line in the country, which ironically is spelled out on top, even though that wasn't the point of that title. And I think they're better than Ohio State's defensive line. Michigan's defense is first in opponent points per game, only allowing 9 points per game, and they're first in red zone scores. They only allow an average of 1.1 red zone scores per game, Maryland gaining 3 of them, so that number was below 1 before their matchup in Week 12, their worst game outside of Bowling Green of the season, and that's in large part due to their defensive line. Players like Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Rashawn Benny, Cam Good, and at defensive end, Jalen Harrell, Braden McGregor, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore. Michigan has a 2-deep that is unlike anything in the country right now. Their 2-deep would be, I think, one of the best defensive lines in the country and in the Big Ten. And their starters, Michigan loves to rotate players up front. It's something that we've seen with Ohio State and Larry Johnson for years, and with Michigan, we've seen it more and more recently, but especially the case this season. Michigan has 27 sacks. They have a sack rate that's top 20 in the country with an 8% sack rate. They shut down opponent rushing attacks, and they pressure quarterbacks, forcing offenses to punt the football away, as the Wolverines are first in opponent punts per offensive score. Every time an opponent scores, on average, they have to punt 3 times in order to get that score. That's the ratio between punts and scores for Michigan's defense. very impressive. And the front four for Michigan, they can get pressure with just those four players. Michigan relies on their defensive line to maintain gap integrity, rush the passer, get in the backfield, stop the run. They rely on their front four to basically do everything so that their linebackers and defensive backs can stay in soft zone and protect big plays. Michigan has only allowed 25 big plays of 20 yards or more on the season. And in comparison to Ohio State, for example, they typically go wider with their defensive line than Michigan, and they rely on their linebackers to typically come forward and either apply pressure, faking pressure, and then backing out into coverage, or straight up stopping the run. Ohio State typically stacks the box heavier and relies, I think, more on their secondary to anchor their defense, whereas Michigan relies more on their defensive line. But Michigan's defense overall is one of the best defenses in the country. We'll dive a little deeper into that in terms of efficiency metrics in a few minutes, but this defense is elite, much like Penn State, much like Ohio State. The Wolverines also only allow 3 yards per rush. The Wolverines are number 1 in total defense. They force you to get off the field. They apply pressure with their defensive tackles, defensive ends. It's an elite defensive line. And I don't want to make the comparison to Georgia's defensive lines over the past 2 seasons, but depending on the outcome of the game, we could be making that comparison. I mean, Kenneth Grant is a 300-plus pound defensive tackle, chased down Katron Allen. Chris Jenkins is likely a first-round pick, one of the few first-round picks that Michigan will have after the 2023 season and the 2024 NFL draft. This defensive line is one of the deepest in the country over the past 3 or 4 seasons, and that's saying a lot. If they continue their success, if they do what we've seen them do, with only the defensive line applying pressure or stopping the run and the back 7 in Jesse Minter's 4-2-5 doing the work in pass coverage or really acting as a safety valve, it will be a long day for Kyle McCord because he doesn't have Georgia's Joe Moore Award caliber offensive line or Oregon's or Oregon State's, and the same goes for running back Travion Henderson. So that's reason number 1, I think the biggest reason why Michigan will win this football game or can win this football game. Number 2 is the offensive line. The offensive line has taken a step back from last year. I think that is noticeable by everyone. This is more of a 2021 caliber offensive line. And I think it is better than 2021 in terms of run blocking. I think it's worse than 2021 in terms of pass blocking. This is the worst Michigan pass block O-line, at least when you look at the tackle position, since before Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines Big Ten Championship series. It's not even close to the 2022 offensive line in either pass block or run block. Nugent, near elite, maybe elite center. He's not Olu Oluwatimi, who was the number 1 center in the country last season. And Carson Barnhart has had issues at tackle. Miles Hinton has as well, even though I think he's better right now than Barnhart is, and I hope that he's healthy. Ladarius Henderson hasn't been healthy. Trente Jones hasn't seen much action. Nonetheless, despite this regression from last year, their offense, Michigan's, is 11th in points per game, score 38.3 points per game, and they're 3rd in rushing touchdowns. Not rushing touchdowns per game, but also total rushing touchdowns. They have 31 rushing touchdowns. They're only behind, I think, UNLV and Air Force in that category. Michigan playing UNLV early in the season, and they did a pretty darn good job of slowing down their run game. I know they had a talent mismatch, but UNLV with Brennan Marion, they run a great offense out there. If Sharon Moore, let's say if he's promoted to Michigan head coach or he leaves, I would want Brennan Marion to come to Michigan. I think he's a bright mind. I think he's a name that, we'll get back on topic, but a name that Penn State, for example, should be going after, especially with the fact that he likes to use vertical threats at receiver, but mainly focuses on the run, so you don't need to have an Ohio State receiver room to have an effective passing offense with his scheme. But the offensive line's still strong. Michigan in the red zone is a machine. This offensive line is power. Last season, you could run stretch, You could run power. You could run power and get big plays. That's how good this offensive line is. That's not the case this season, but they will still get a guaranteed 1, 2, 3, or 4 yards on a run play unless you send 8 or 7 defenders forward to stop them. That's a good offensive line. And the rushing attack it's not top 25. It's not even top 20 in terms of total yards per game. But Michigan isn't running the football as much as they did last year either, and not as much as other teams. So I think if they ran the football more, or if they didn't chew clock as much as they did, they're outside of the top 120 in seconds per play. They chew up some of the most clock per play out of any team. You would see some more offensive production. Michigan loves to be methodical, love to chew clock, but we'll get more into that. This offensive line has allowed McCarthy, I think, to only be sacked 13 or 14 times. It certainly regressed from last year, as we've already discussed, but they're elite on the interior, and they're deep everywhere, in fact, when healthy. And you have to take into account the injuries, and you can't replicate Joe Moore award-winning offensive lines year after year after year. And maybe I fell for that in the preseason, thinking that because Michigan returned one of their tackles, most of their two deep, and 2 of their guards, that they just automatically reload. And I think they had the potential to. But something's been off, specifically with the tackles. If Michigan's tackle play was consistent from last year, the offensive line would have still regressed, but we'd be talking about a Joe Moore Award caliber offensive line right now. Michigan is 15th in sacks allowed per game. When you adjust for sack percentage, that's adjusting for how many sacks do you allow per passing attempts per game, Michigan is 35th, but that's still above average good in terms of sack percentage. And in terms of rushing yards per game, they're 43rd. Rushing attempts per game, they're 38th. Yards per carry, they're 45th. This offensive line has regressed. Part of the rushing problems have been due to Donovan Edwards, and I think Blake Corum just not being quite the same running backs that they were last year, especially in the case of Donovan Edwards. I just think Blake Corum, he's more of a power running back anyway, and he can make moves, but he needs help from his offensive line, not just at the initial point of attack to get big plays. Donovan Edwards, he finds space just for a second, and he's gone because he has that straight line type of speed. The Wolverines' offensive line has bullied Ohio State's defensive line before, and Michigan will win again if that's the case this season. And I don't think that this is likely that they will bully Ohio State's defensive line. I think this is reason number 2, because the offensive line, I think, is good enough to where there's that 50-50 split between Ohio State's defensive line and Michigan's offensive line at minimum. And I still think that Michigan's offensive line at the interior, given how Ohio State lines up on defense, Michigan will have a power edge over Ohio State. I don't expect big runs from Michigan against Ohio State. I think they'll have a harder time getting explosive run plays than they did against Penn State, but I think they will have an easier time running against Ohio State's zero blitzes than against Penn State's, because Penn State typically lines up tighter than Ohio State, and I think that means that Ohio State's defense will have to adjust, maybe become uncomfortable in that, or Michigan will be able to get consistently 3, 4, maybe 5 yards per pop. And I think Michigan's patient enough, and the offensive line is patient enough and has enough stamina to execute that similar concept over and over again and run it down opposing people's throats. Number 3 is team efficiency. Michigan is 3rd in offensive efficiency. They're 1st in defensive efficiency, and they're 90th in special teams efficiency per ESPN's analytics. Should say analytics. It says analytics. My bad. Special teams, I think, should be higher. Against Maryland, they looked like one of the best special teams units in the country. The problem with Michigan is they don't have to use their special teams unit that much, because they either force turnovers on defense. On special teams, they typically just have a fair catch, for example. Maybe Jake Thaw returns it. He's a very reliable punt returner. But James Turner hasn't had to kick many field goals. Tommy Doman hasn't had to punt the ball all that much. The offense and the defense take care of business, and Michigan is number one by a large, large margin in terms of team efficiency. It's really not close. Michigan's number one, and Ohio State in team efficiency is number three. On the surface, that may look like they're extremely close, but Michigan has a 5.5 point efficiency edge over the Buckeyes. That means the difference between Michigan and Ohio State in terms of efficiency, the number one and number three teams, is the same distance as really Ohio State and Florida State, the number 3 and number 9 team. Michigan also has a 4.1 efficiency point advantage over Oregon, who's number 2. And Michigan has a better offense by efficiency than every team in the country except for Oregon and LSU, and they have a better defense than anyone in the country per ESPN's efficiency, with a 4-point efficiency edge over Penn State defensively, which means the difference between Michigan and Penn State's defense per efficiency is the same as Penn State and Iowa's defense per efficiency, which is just nuts. I mean, Michigan has this massive edge in terms of how efficient they are and how they execute. They're one of the least penalized teams in the country. I haven't talked about this much on this channel because I wrote down a bunch of statistics and I've been featuring them in my videos. If there's any background noise due to me turning the page, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to go through my notebook and I'm going to look at some of these penalty statistics and I'm going to read them to you because I think they're important. Turnover margin per game. This also includes turnovers. Turnovers and penalties really factor into discipline, how methodical you are, efficiency. Turnover margin per game. Michigan plus 1.1. That's tied for third. Ohio State, their turnover margin is flat. That's tied for 59th. Michigan is 23rd in takeaways per game, averaging 1.7 takeaways per game. They only give the ball away 0.6 times per game, which is fifth. They're 31st in fumbles per game. Ohio State actually beats them there. In opponent fumbles per game, Michigan often forces one opponent fumble per game. Michigan is tied for 20th in fumble recoveries. They're 14th, tied for 14th in interceptions thrown per game. They're 9th in interceptions that their defense forces per game. They're 26th in interception throw percentage. In penalties per game, they're first. Penalty yards per game, they're first. They're second in penalties per play, which is very impressive. And Michigan, on average, their opponents only have 5 penalties per game. So they face disciplined teams and yet out-discipline or perform at a better level on the discipline front than their opponents. Rutgers, for example, very disciplined team. Ohio State is a above average to average team in terms of penalties and turnovers. Michigan's one of the most disciplined teams in the country. They're deep. They're efficient. Here's another statistic, too. Michigan scores just about, it's a little under 1 point, but it's so close that I'm going to round it. Michigan scores 1 point per 10 yards gained offensively. That's nuts. That's bonkers. And I think Penn State is slightly behind Michigan in that category, but that's because their offense typically gets short fields from the amount of turnovers their defense forces. For Michigan, they don't force nearly as many turnovers as Penn State, and yet they have a higher yards per point offensively because Michigan's good on third down conversion. They're one of the best teams in the nation in third down conversion percentage, and they're methodical on offense and vicious, getting turnovers, pressure, forcing punts on the defensive side of the football. If both Michigan and Ohio State play to their ceiling, I think this is where team efficiency comes in. If both play their best game, most data tells us the Wolverines will win the game. As Michigan right now, they're just a few inches away from Ohio State in terms of football power index. They're a good chunk above Ohio State in efficiency. Some would say there's a large chasm that actually separates these two teams in terms of efficiency. And Michigan has home field advantage, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The adaptability, number 4, that ties into team efficiency. But I wanted to make this a separate point. I probably won't spend as many minutes on this point as I did the previous. The Wolverines have ran varying offensive and defensive schemes all season long, especially in November. Against Purdue, J.J. McCarthy passed for more than 30 attempts. Against Penn State, he only passed 8 times, still was efficient and was good, just like in the Purdue game. But Michigan ran the ball a ton, and they ran for over 200 yards. And against Maryland, more of a balanced attack, more run-heavy. McCarthy nor the whole team played as well as they did against Purdue or Penn State. And defensively, I think the Wolverines had to adapt against Maryland because they were running that soft zone, and Maryland was taking whatever they could out of it and occasionally testing the Wolverines deep. And if Taulia Tagovailoa was just more accurate, not even by a wide percentage, but if he was just a little more accurate, Maryland could have had some big plays in the secondary. So Michigan adapted. They started running stunts defensively. They brought more pressure, and it worked. That's why Michigan only scored 2 points in the fourth quarter, but shut out Maryland and escaped with a 31-24 win. McCarthy's also shown a keen ability to improvise on the move with his legs. He has this... It's a Walmart edition of Patrick Mahomes, Jaden Daniels' ability to improvise on the run, to maneuver in the pocket and still make good throws or occasionally take off and scramble for decent to big gains. He is not Jaden Daniels. He is not Patrick Mahomes. I'm not making that comparison. What I'm saying is I'm drawing from some of their characteristics and showing that McCarthy has a little bit of that in him. He's an adaptable player. He's not a perfect player. He's regressed in the past few games for sure, but he's still a weapon to watch out for. Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum, they are good at making cuts and changing direction in their runs to find open holes. Edwards struggled with this until the Penn State game, when he made some plays where if he ran where the staff designed him to run, he would have been stopped. But he changed direction a few times and broke a few tackles, and that's why he was able to get a rushing touchdown on 3rd and long against Penn State on what was a beautifully designed play, and really Sharon Moore out-coaching and out-scheming Manny Diaz there. Against Maryland, Edwards also had a decent game on the ground, and Corum, he's shifty. He can change direction. He's good with juke moves, and he's good with power. The question with Corum is he doesn't have that elite home run speed like Henderson of Ohio State or Edwards of Michigan does. But overall, I think he's a better back than Edwards. With Henderson, we'll have to see. Earlier in the week, I would have said more confidently that Corum's the better running back, but looking at just how Henderson is played versus how Corum is played, Henderson's more impressive in every statistical category, but Corum has played and shined against Penn State's defense. He's played, on average, a tougher defense than Henderson has. So we'll have to wait and see, but I will tell you Henderson's more statistically impressive. But I think Michigan has had to adapt. And I don't know if Ohio State has had to adapt as much as Michigan has, or if they've consciously chosen to adapt as much as Michigan has. I could be wrong there, though, but I think that the team that adapts will have an advantage, and that will tie into who is the most physical team, because I think overall the most physical team will win this battle. And number 5 is the Big House. Ohio State hasn't played in an environment like this all season long. Granted, this was the same point in favor of Ohio State last season when Michigan entered the shoe. Michigan had not played a road game with this environment all season long. So this is why the Big House is reason number 5, because it's not a big reason. It could be game deciding, like little reasons or little plays or 1 4th down conversion could be. But in the large scope of things, there will be many other reasons why Michigan can and will win. Same for Ohio State. That's why for the Buckeyes, they put Michigan's cheating as the 5th reason. I don't think that will be the biggest reason for Ohio State's success if they do go into Ann Arbor and win. Now, may we look back on 2021 and 2022 and question whether Michigan's success was due to cheating in those seasons? Yes, but Michigan objectively this season by efficiency, football power, by the JP poll from thanks Josh Pate, by my own power rankings, by my eye test, all of those things tell me this Michigan team is better than the 2021 team, and they're probably better than the 2022 team. Though if Michigan loses tomorrow and it's not particularly close, or maybe if they lose in general, maybe that point is null and void because the 2022 team was ridiculously good. They should have performed better than they did in the postseason, but that's the fault of the staff and the fault of the players, and I think Michigan's done a good job of taking responsibility of that. The fan base, coaches, players, myself, I think even Ohio State fans and players understand that Michigan will view their season as a failure if they lose. It will be loud. Michigan's undefeated in the Big House since 2021, and Ohio State, again, has not played in a big environment like this all season long. Notre Dame had a good crowd. It's not this crowd. It's not 100,000 near Michigan fans who will be screaming at the top of their lungs, who've been convinced rightly or wrongly that Ohio State is behind the whole sign-stealing leak, and therefore they're mad at Ohio State. And the weather is going to be cold. It's going to be cold. Maybe some flurries. That was the last time I checked, which was a few days ago, so I'm just going to say it'll be cold because I know the temperature more recently than I do the precipitation. I think that Michigan at home I think they're really good, just like every team. Every team typically plays better at home than they do on the road, and Michigan has had back-to-back road games against Penn State, a sandwich game against Maryland, one that, granted, I thought they would dominate, but they didn't. However, Michigan's coming back home. I think they're going to be motivated. They're going to be on fire. And the two teams are close enough on paper that home field advantage could be what decides this game. If Michigan wins by 3, that tells me that if this game was played in Columbus, Ohio State probably wins this matchup, which is totally possible. Or on a neutral site, maybe this game goes into overtime, or Michigan wins by a field goal, or OSU wins by a field goal. Who knows? And many people are predicting that the winner will win by less than a touchdown. They'll win by 3 or 4 points, maybe by the hair of a rabbit, by 1 or 2 points on a failed extra point or failed 2-point conversion. Who knows? So that's reason number 5, and overall those are 5 reasons why I think that the Michigan Wolverines will beat the Ohio State Buckeyes. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this game down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Anthony McDowell, and Justin Rogg for being Heisman Patreon members for the month of November. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst, Noah DDLC, and SFS Inverted for being All-American patrons. Thanks to Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Chris Lane, Austin Christmas, and Zubin Zah for being all-conference patrons. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all around. Bye-bye.